And we are live. Welcome to the NBA Strategy Show. It is Wednesday, January 1st, 2025. Happy New Year, everybody. 2024 in the rear view. 2025 is here. And we have a 6-game slate on DraftKings, an 8-game slate on FanDuel ahead of us, so hit that like button if you can. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Engleman. What's up, everybody? I hope you guys had a good night. Hope no crazy shenanigans went down for you guys. I had a tame one. Went to a crappy dinner. Came home, went to bed. Nothing crazy. So, now we're just in it. Now, the next 6 weeks or so, up until the NBA All-Star break, this is the home stretch of the NBA. This is the good part. This is where it really feels like we're in it. And I'm excited to break this one down. Like I said, we got 6 games today on the DraftKings side. They dropped the Atlanta-Denver game, which is kind of a shame. That has a 246 total and is a relatively high pace. Meanwhile, Philly-Sacramento fell off as the 10 o'clock start. Don't hate that one all that much. A lot of shout-outs for Keith this morning. He had a good night as well. He's slowly getting better. We'll grab him later tonight on playback when Greg and I are watching Magic Pistons or Bulls Wizards at 7. I'll go grab the little man and bring him back up here. But for now, we got to break down some basketball, folks. That's where we need to be. Should be a fun one. Two 7 o'clocks, 3 7:30s, and then our DraftKings late night hammer, Dallas, Houston at 8 p.m. So, it's a weird one. This Chicago-Washington game is going to be pretty crazy. Here are, for the 5 games that aren't Bulls-Wizards, I have the pace at 97.5, 97, 97, 98, and 98. I've got the pace for Chicago and Washington, 105.4. That's like 8 possessions more than any other game. So that one's going to end up looking a little bit different. Not to mention the Bulls and the Wiz don't exactly have great defenses either. But Chicago, number 3 in pace on the season. Washington, number 4. They're also the number 25 and number 27 ranked defenses. Ooh, this one's going to get wild. So I'm assuming we have a relatively thin group today, whether it's hangovers, work, or they're just off and hanging out. So let's get it started. Let's break this one down the best that we can, and we will start with the Orlando Magic. Those Magic are 1.5-point dogs in Detroit, 211 total. Orlando has a Q tag on Anthony Black. Jalen Suggs is probable. We're still waiting on Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, but at least Paolo is marked as return to competition reconditioning. So he should be slowly but surely coming back. Now, ownership here for Orlando feels a little high to me on the DraftKings side. Now, some of these guys look all right. But, we've got KCP at 15. We've got Jalen Suggs at 5. We've got Goga at 20, Tristan Da Silva at 25, Wendell Carter Jr. In between 20 and 25, Anthony Black at 15, John Isaac at 15. I'm a little dubious on some of this. I gotta be honest. Now, there are parts that I like. I don't think KCP's 15% ownership is a problem. I think that looks pretty normal to me. Shooting guard, small forward, 4,500, 6-game slate. So, nothing too crazy for me there. Let me set this filter back up again. 1 second. Goga continues to just play in and around 30 minutes. I might be a little light there, but I'm happy to get to Goga. I think he looks good. Suggs is difficult to get to at 8,300. It feels like he never finishes a game. We got Wendell Carter Jr. back in the starting lineup last time out. He's 5,200, power forward, center eligible. Feels a little overowned, north of 20% here. I don't think that holds all day. We got to figure out what are they actually doing with the end of their rotation. Some guys played the first half last time out. Some guys played the second. We didn't have Anthony Black. Gary Harris is here now. So I don't really have a great feel on who plays in that Jet Howard, Corey Joseph, Trevelyan Queen, Caleb Houston group. And then you get someone like Tristan Da Silva, 4,900, small forward, power forward, eligible, 25% owned. I think there's too much ownership coming into this Orlando side so far. I don't love the matchup. It's relatively pace neutral, but 211 total is the lowest total on today's slate. This just feels a little high. Now, maybe Anthony Black ends up out again and we can redistribute some of these minutes a little bit more. But like $4,700 Anthony Black, probably coming off the bench, 15% owned. I think we're going to find better spots than that. Honestly, I'd be slightly more interested in someone like John Isaac, but he's already 15% owned as well. I think the focus that I would want here from Orlando would be KCP, Goga, and Tristan Da Silva. And I think that Tristan Da Silva is over-owned for his range of outcomes. Like, he's not a great per minute guy. I've got him in at 0.84. And you can see the difference in how being a better per minute guy changes the way that you could hit your target scores. Like, I got him at 17% to hit 30.5 fantasy points. It's a lot easier for me to look at even someone like Goga, whose odds of hitting their target score are massively higher because of that per minute rate. So I think Tristan Da Silva is over-owned. I think Goga's basically properly owned. KCP is just easy to get to because of price and positionality. But we do kind of need that Anthony Black news to find out if we do have the ability to get to anything else here. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that they don't go with the double center lineup again. I mean, they probably do, but they don't have to. But I think there's just a bit too much ownership coming into Orlando. I mean, the next three closest games are all projected for 10 less real points. And then we got 2 games in the 230s. I'm a little surprised to see as much love here. It's not like we've got any new value. Like, these are the same guys that have been in now for a couple days since Mo Wagner went down. Why so much ownership? Don't get it. I don't get it. And then we look at Detroit, and these guys are basically unowned. 20% coming into Tobias Harris, 15 coming into Asar Thompson. I'm not anywhere near the Asar Thompson ownership. I can say that. I don't think that sticks around, but in theory it can. I'm probably a little light on his minutes. Did play 24 last time out. So that's probably somebody I'll bump up who's going to look a little bit better. Let me take that lap through it right now and just handle that. I probably have him a little underrepresented, but we finally got Beef Stew back last time out. I missed Fontecchio out. Don't know how I did that, but that explains why I don't have nearly as much of Asar Thompson. Was he out 4 hours ago? Because I don't remember seeing him highlighted as out in my sheet, but evidently he was highlighted as out in my sheet. So, swing and a miss from that note. So, Asar Thompson, if I give him 19 minutes, he's a 4.8x value. Yeah, I'm not surprised to see that ownership coming in now. Or went out for Fontecchio for today. But 4% ownership to Cade. Cade Cunningham is 10,600 on DraftKings today. and 9,600 on FanDuel. Steven, he's out on the injury report for personal reasons. So I don't know how I missed that one, but I definitely did. But anyway, look, you want to pay up for Cade and be contrarian here? You can do it, but it feels a little scary. Meanwhile, like Tobias Harris doesn't feel like he should be a 20%er on a day like today, 5,100. To me, that's more of like a 15. It's just a little overowned. I think I'm most interested, and I don't want to say it like I'm about to say it, but like $3,600 shooting guard, small forward Tim Hardaway is 2% owned. Should he really be 2? Should Tim Hardaway be 2% owned if Tristan da Silva is 26? If Anthony Black is 16? Honestly, if KCP is 16. So, like, look, he sucks. He sucks. He's a 0.63 fantasy point per minute guy. I got him in for 28 minutes. That's not very good. But you only need 25 fantasy points, and he's 2% owned. So I know the defensive side of this one's not great. It's a pace down spot for the Pistons. But I think Tim Hardaway Jr. is pretty significantly under-owned, given where some of the other guys are going to get any sort of value ownership today. I don't really want to get to any parts of Jalen Duren or Isaiah Stewart. They seem difficult right now to deal with. Malik Beasley is fine. You know, I would argue probably a hair under-owned. Not the most cost-effective guy on the planet, but shooting guard, small forward, 5,300, you know, obviously can get the shots up. A little under-owned. Don't really have much to say about Jaden Ivey. If I'm looking at Detroit, I'm willing to roll the dice in GPPs on Cade Cunningham. But this spot feels awful, and I don't love locking him in at 7 o'clock. Tobias Harris to me is a hair over-owned, but probably the easiest name to click on. Asar Thompson does look like a decent value. But I think the sneakiest dude that you could roster here today is Tim Hardaway Jr. for the Pistons. 3,600, shooting guard, small forward, 2% owned. We're going to talk about some other paydown options for a 6-game slate. They're going to get a lot more ownership than that, and I don't think that balance is correct. All right, game number 2. Here we go. Chicago Bulls. 5.5 point favorites in Washington, 237 total. I got 105 pace on this one, massively heavier than anything else. Now, we are waiting on some injury news. Zach LaVine is questionable for this one. Torrey Craig is doubtful. And Ayo Dosunmu's still out. Now, assuming LaVine is in, projected for 15% ownership. I had him at 15% optimal. Looks spot on. Happy to get to LaVine. Coby White projected for 8% ownership. I got him at 15% optimal. I think Coby White is under-owned. But the guy that's most under-owned here is Patrick Williams. 11%, 4,600, and power forward eligible. Right? He's 11% owned. He's 4,600. He's power forward eligible. He's $300 cheaper than Tristan da Silva. Less than half the ownership. John Isaac is basically the same ownership. Now, we saw Patrick Williams last time out play 32 minutes with no LaVine. He played 29 the game before that. I went to 29 here. He should be owned a bit more. He's my most optimal bull. You're only looking for 29 fantasy points out of him at 4,600. He's a 0.9 fantasy point per minute guy for me. 11% in a matchup against the Wizards with no defense, all the pace. Why not? What am I missing here? He's back in the starting lineup again. 30 minutes are on the table. 11%. He should be more owned than Zach LaVine. He's a really good value in my eyes today. Patrick Williams is definitely my priority for the Bulls. Definitely. Because of this matchup. Like, is Patrick Williams typically a 0.9 fantasy point per minute guy? No. But the Bulls gain 2.5 possessions over their average. This pace is 7 possessions faster than any other game. He scores more fantasy points per minute now in this spot than he does on average. And that's why I think he's being underrepresented. I don't think he's being looked at correctly based on this game. I mean, we got to remember, this game has a 26-point higher total than Orlando and Detroit and projects to play an 8 extra possessions. This is a much better game environment for everybody involved. So I think that everybody here should be getting to quite a bit more of Patrick Williams at 4,600. I don't mind getting Vooch, but 9,100 is pretty silly. I don't mind getting Giddey. He's properly owned at 8%. I don't mind getting Lonzo at 3,800. I think he's properly owned at 8%. And you could even make a case that it should be a hair higher than that. But as I'm looking at this right now, the guy I want the most, pretty clearly, highest optimal, highest boom, but not the highest ownership. Give me Patrick Williams. Now on the Wizards side, we don't know the status of Jordan Poole. We don't know the status of Bub Carrington. Bub Carrington's injury designation is post-traumatic headache, which is not something I've ever seen before. Jordan Poole's got the left hip contusion. We are getting Giddey, the best play on Chicago. Yeah, hard to disagree. So obviously, we need the news on Poole and Bub Carrington. That's going to change things up, and it's going to be able to free up minutes potentially to these guys in the rotation that we don't know are playing. We're currently projecting 40% ownership to Alex Sarr. Now, do I think that Alex Sarr looks like a good play? Yes, I do. I would argue that one is quite a bit high, however. I had him 12% optimal, 23% boom. He's like a little over a fantasy point per minute guy. He won't, I don't think he'll be 40% owned by the time we get to the end of this. Maybe that changes if Poole and Carrington are out, but if Alex Sarr is 41% owned, is he a good play today? Yes. Is he one of the better Wizards today? Yes. Should he be 40% owned? No, not to me. I'm a little bit more interested in someone like Joval here. He's 5K. He's 12% owned. I had him 14% optimal. He's been playing a hair more as of late. Got 21 minutes this last time out, 21 minutes the game before that, 23 the game before that. I only gave him 20, and I don't think that's too crazy. So I'm not surprised to see Joval have the second most ownership on the Wizards. But we do still need to pay attention to what we get out of Poole and Carrington. Now, if they're both in, you're probably not going to much here. If either one of them are out, you're definitely going to feel better, a little bit better about your Koulibaly's, the other guy that's in, potentially Malcolm Brogdon at 6,200, although I don't think he's going to look great. Hard to say what they're doing with Kyle Kuzma's minutes, so he seems off the table. The Champagny, George, Kispert trio is just three of the exact same guys overall. Hard to really separate them in terms of who's going to get the minutes. So my focus would be Sarr and Joval. Sarr's ownership seems high, but should be, double digits. But ultimately, we need to pay very close attention and get the news on Jordan Poole and Bub Carrington. So, schedule for the rest of the day. This one's pretty easy. Nothing too crazy here. We've got the NFL Strategy Show coming up next at 10 a.m. Laffy and Greg breaking that one down. I will be back with Spags tonight for the deeper dive at 5 o'clock. Greg will be back with Eric for Live Before Lock at 6. And then we don't have any football tonight, everybody. It's Wednesday, which means New Year's Day edition of Playback. You'll get myself, you'll get Greg, and you'll get us watching an hour's worth of games. Orlando, Detroit, Chicago, Washington, 3 games starting at 7:30. So we'll hang out for an hour, talk late swaps, talk ownership, talk bets, whatever you guys are interested in. Cleveland Picker, why do you have Kuzma at 26 minutes? Just out of curiosity. Not sure I see that. Seems like a lot. Seems like a lot. Ohio State, Oregon football tonight. Yeah, no. Couldn't care less. It's college football. Yuck. What do I have them at? It's on the screen, brother. Why share it? The whole point of this bad boy. I don't think 26 is crazy. It feels a tad high. That implies that he could play like 28 or 29 today, and I don't think that's in the cards. He might be a little high there. All right, game number 3. New Orleans Pelicans. 9-point dogs in Miami, 221 total. Pels have a Q tag on Jeremiah Robinson Earl. Otherwise, it's sort of par for the course for the Pelicans. Jose Alvarado is doubtful, though. He's slowly but surely working his way back. He's been out for a minute now. But we're still waiting on Brandon Ingram and Zion at this point. So around 10% ownership to DeJounte Murray, around 15 to McCollum, around 15 to Yves Missi. Herb Jones and Trey Murphy both at 7. I don't see the huge separation between these Pels guys. Like, I think Herb Jones is the best option from the Pelicans, but he's 7% owned. And then we see CJ McCollum at 17. I think he should be like 9 or 10. So it's not that I don't think these guys should be getting ownership. I have 56% total optimal on New Orleans, and there's 57% ownership. I just want to redistribute it. I want a little bit less of Yves Missi, a little bit more of Herb Jones, a little bit less of CJ McCollum, a little bit more of Trey Murphy, and then no difference for DeJounte, like right around that 10 to 15 range. But I'm happy to get to the starters here. Miami's in like at least a little bit of turmoil. Now, don't get me wrong, New Orleans sucks, but I don't think they like suck. They've been extra sucky. I don't imagine we'll ever see Zion playing for them again. I would be very surprised if Zion doesn't play for the Pelicans again. At least this year. I'm not sure they could trade him during this season. I would expect him to be back at some point. But yeah, I'm not upset about getting to this starting 5. I just want to move it around a little bit if this is what the ownership looks like. Now, the ownership could very clearly and will clearly change throughout the day. This could flatten back out again. So I don't want to make it seem like I have any specific takes. As of right now, I think Herb Jones and DeJounte Murray are the 2 best options you can get to. But all of these guys pretty well look the same. Basically the same. Now, on the Miami side, we have Keshad Johnson is questionable with the G League team. That might have something to do with Duncan Robinson being questionable today with a right foot strain. Scary Terry is out for the suspension after the fight in the last one. Everybody else that's normally available is available, including James Butler. Just kidding, it's Jimmy. I know it's Jimmy. No one correct me, please. So their minutes are weird as hell. I don't have a great feel about who's playing for these guys in any way, but what I can say is the guys that are getting the ownership are the ones that I would expect to get it. 15% ownership coming into Tyler Hero. He's point guard, shooting guard eligible, 8,500. I had him 13% optimal. Ownership looks spot on. You should be paying attention to Tyler Hero. Bam Adebayo, center eligible, 8,700, 11% owned, 11% optimal. We're talking about a 1.2 fantasy point per minute guy. Not really a matchup that I think he'd be super worried about. No problems getting to Bam. I went 30 minutes to Jimmy Butler. He's obviously been out for a bit. I don't have a great feel for how many minutes he plays. He's unowned. I got a hard time wanting to click Jimmy Butler's name, but I would not be surprised at all if Jimmy Butler went out there and tried to prove a point in some way. I don't know what that way would be, but it could be either trying really hard or not trying all that hard. What else do we have here? So the other guy getting love is the guy that we don't know is playing, and that's Duncan Robinson. He's 4,500. He's shooting guard only. 14% owned. Now, I went 26 minutes on Duncan Robinson. I don't know who they're playing in this rotation anymore. Stokastic has 27. He's probably like a hair over owned. I don't have a ton of confidence in these guys. I really don't. But there's just not a lot to like here. The total's not horrid. It's 221. It could be better for sure. I mean, it's not Orlando, Detroit. But I think the focus is just Hero and Butler. Maybe if Duncan Robinson ends up out, we can take a closer look at Jovic or Jaquez or Burks or, Larson potentially. I guess we do need to talk about the one interesting piece of the Miami rotation these past two games. We got 38 minutes last time out for Haywood Highsmith and 36 minutes the game before that. If Haywood Highsmith's playing north of 30, he's at least somebody we can talk about. But he's Haywood Highsmith. He's their worst per minute fantasy performer on the team. So it's not good. Not good. Yeah, if I'm going anywhere, Hero is first. Bam would be second. But honestly, I don't anticipate having much. Steven, you are absolutely right. The rotations for Miami are brutal. They're absolutely brutal. They never make any sense to me. Now, speaking of a rotation that won't make any sense to me, the Utah Jazz are 13-point dogs in New York. 230 total. Now, for the Jazz, John Collins is doubtful. Cody Williams is with the G League team. We're not getting a lot of love into these guys. 15% ownership to Walker Kessler, around 10 to Keontae George. I would argue that 2% owned Jordan Clarkson is a hair under-owned. I would argue that 1% Colin Sexton is a hair under-owned. I would argue that 1% Lauri Markkanen is a hair under-owned. I would also argue that a $3,200 shooting guard small forward Johnny Juzang at 1% ownership is quite a bit under-owned. I gave him 24 minutes and have him as the most optimal option from the Utah Jazz. If he's 1% owned, that seems a little light. I'm probably a hair high on his minutes. I don't have a great feel for what they do with Juzang and Sensabaugh and Collier and Filipowski and Potter. So I want to keep a close eye on that. But on the off chance that Juzang is starting today, which I do think that he will be, he should be more owned than 1%. So should Markkanen. The ownership on Kessler and the ownership on George both make sense. They should be in that 10 to 15 range. But I would argue Clarkson is a little slept on here. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. But like, I think the focus would be a lot better on the Markkanen, Kessler, George, Clarkson group. Assuming Juzang starts, though, you're going to want to get to him a little bit more than what the 1% is showing. Lord Kangaroo. I like Sensabaugh more than Juzang. More than what? I mean, it all comes down to who's starting. If it's Juzang again, it's really hard to want to like Bryce Sensabaugh with a worse positional eligibility and $500 more expensive and coming off the bench. And neither one of them are owned. That's a tough sell to me. So yeah, look, and it's not surprising. I mean, Utah's the biggest underdog on the slate at 13 points. I actually think it should be a little bit higher. We'll see where that line goes because Jalen Brunson is once again questionable for this one. Now, he was questionable for last game, and he played 36 minutes. So we are getting quite a bit of ownership for the Knicks, and we should. Mikal Bridges, for reasons that make zero sense to me, is 5% owned. I'd argue that he's the best play on the Knicks. Brunson's 30% owned. That's fine. He looks like he should be 20. I'm cool with that. Anunoby's 25. I got his optimal at 18. Boom at 30. That ownership looks fine. I don't know why Josh Hart's only 10% owned. I have his optimal at 17. And then Towns is 10% owned. I got his optimal at 15. I want to get way more than Knicks. Why is Mikal Bridges 5% owned? Shooting guard, small forward, 6,600. Why? Makes no sense. This is a guy that's played 36, 47, 44, 43, and 41 minutes over his last 5. He's averaging 42 over the last 3, 42 over the last 5, 41 over the last 10, and 39 plus for the whole year. And now we get to play Utah? And Bridges is playing better? He had a great December. If he's 5% owned, he's the best play on the slate in GPP to me. It's not even close. But I want to get more Josh Hart. Brunson at 30 makes sense. Anunoby at 24 makes sense. No disagreements there. You know what? I do have a disagreement. Why is OG Anunoby 25% owned, but Mikal Bridges is 5? Like, I don't even think that makes sense in its own game. Yes, OG Anunoby is a better per minute guy. Mikal Bridges has a better positional eligibility. He should be playing a couple more minutes than him to offset the per minute rates. But one of them's 24 and the other's 5. If that looks like that by the time we get to lock, we're getting a gift. And if you want to play a little bit more for someone like Towns at 10-4, go for it. It's hard to deny that Karl Anthony Towns today at 10,400, like, he looks better than if you wanted to pay 10-6 for Cade Cunningham. But they're not really owned all that differently. And then we're also getting around 10% ownership to Precious Achiuwa. He's 3,700, power forward, center eligible. Looks fine as a value option. I don't think that ownership's crazy. But I want that whole damn starting 5. And I want it in slightly different ways. Because if Bridges is 5% owned, we want that for sure. Get yourself those Knicks. Let's go to game number 5. Brooklyn Nets, Toronto Raptors. This one's tough. So buckle up. So the Brooklyn Nets have a Q tag on Zaire Williams. He's been out for quite a bit now. We also have no Cam Thomas for this one. He came back for one game, now he's gone. And we're getting a boatload of ownership here because we got to remember, there's no Shake Milton, there's no Dorian Finney-Smith, there is a D'Angelo Russell. So we have 35% ownership coming into a $6,200 Nick Claxton. We have 45% ownership coming in to a $5,100 point guard, shooting guard, D'Angelo Russell. We're getting 20 to Noah Clowney and around 15 for Keon Johnson. Also, for reasons that I can't really figure out right now. And trust me, I don't say this one too frequently, but Ben Simmons is 6K and 5% owned. I assume he's going to continue to play whatever minutes he can. They just traded 2 guys in the rotation, only replaced him with 1. So I assume Simmons continues to play the minute, or at least a decent chunk of the minutes that he had been playing. I mean, as of right now, Ben Simmons, 31, 29, 30, and 29 over his last 4. I went with the 29. So I think Ben Simmons is underrepresented in GP Please today. I think that D'Angelo Russell is arguably the number 1 play on the slate. Nick Claxton looks damn good. 5.5x value. 35% owned. I think Keon Johnson is still viable. He's 10 to 15% owned. Noah Clowney potentially starting today, looking 20% owned. Looks fine to me. Brooklyn looks awesome here. It's a pace up spot. They gain 1.5 possessions over their average. And honestly, outside of Zaire Williams, if he's back, and Day'Ron Sharpe, I probably want a decent chunk of the rest of these 7 guys. But the heavy priorities, the heavy priority is D'Angelo Russell. I think Claxton and Simmons look interesting. Simmons for the lack of ownership, Claxton just because. Justin Kelly, Josh, did you quit playing DFS? For the most part, over the past 2 weeks, yeah. New puppy. It's hard by the time that I get off of these shows to just bail and then let my wife continue to take care of them while we're late swapping and shit. Not to mention holidays, we're making it, people were in town or we were moving around. So it's just a lot of slates in a row that were either puppy related or holiday related, or football related. Days where we don't have the playback show and these things were going on, I didn't really have much interest. But today, 6-game slate, locks at 8, locks at 7, finishes up at 8, and I'm on playback till 8. I'm playing tonight's slate. I can't wait to play it today too. So, good eye, but yeah, it was basically from the time that we got the puppy and I had no chance to focus on anything. We're just constantly having to take him out. Aaron says, Russell never works out for me. Well, now he's 5,100 point guard, shooting guard eligible on a different team that's probably going to play him a lot. So today's probably a slightly different day. I wouldn't get too worried about that. All right, let's look at the Toronto side. Now, for Toronto, this one's really difficult to talk about. They're on a back-to-back. They got absolutely destroyed by the Boston Celtics yesterday. So I have no idea who's going to be in here. Are we going to have RJ Barrett today? I don't know. Didn't play yesterday. Are we going to have Grady Dick? I don't know. Didn't play yesterday. Are we going to have Bruce Brown on a back-to-back? I don't know. Probably not. And then we have no idea if anybody else could potentially be out. So I don't want to dig too much into Toronto. What I can say is this. I projected everybody in. The most owned guy is Scotty Barnes at 8%. The most optimal guy I had was RJ Barrett at 8%. Toronto looks terrible across the board. They lose 2.8 possessions below their average. I'm not even going to dig in any further here. We need their injury report. It'll be out at either 1:30 or 2:30, depending on how active they're feeling. We'll talk about them on the deeper dive, but for right now, nothing looks good if they're in. Oh, Justin Kelly, this show's never going anywhere, brother. Show's never going anywhere. I will be doing the NBA strategy show, I hope, every single day of the week until Stokastic's not a company anymore. And even then, I'd probably do it after that. But no, it's not going anywhere, brother. Cleveland Picker, just out of curiosity, why is the new 30-minute-a-game point guard that's $1,500 underpriced and 40% owned. Not the best play on the slate. I'll wait. You're going to have a tough time justifying that opinion. For the record, he is the most owned play today. To think that he's not the best play on the slate would be an opinion that flies in the face of all logic and reason. Final game of the DraftKings slate. Now, before we get to it, I want to hit this. You guys can see the banner on the screen. I'm going to pull up the ad as well. Ooh, pour one out for Ginty. This is going to end today. We only started this yesterday, and it will end today. If you're a sports bettor, if you're a pick'em site player, you can get the Odds Shopper Portfolio EV tool, our market-based approach to beating the books and the pick'em sites, for $25. That's 75% off the normal price. It's usually $100 a month. You get it for $25 using the promo code EV25. EV25. Obviously for 2025. Link in the description, or you can just sign up and enter that code while you do it. But we take a market-based approach to beating the books. We give you bet sizes and expected value, expected win rate. We have parlay builders. We have odds boost calculators. And the easiest way to explain this really is to follow Greg Ehrenberg on Twitter. He's been doing a bankroll challenge for the NBA since the beginning of the season. He's up $600 on a $100 bankroll so far. I believe he gave out most of that profit either today or yesterday, something along those lines. I didn't catch the final part of it. He's tracked it every single day, every single bet. If you want to understand how this tool works, look through his history of the bankroll challenge on Twitter. That'll show you that you can start with $100 and make quite a bit of money. And now you can get in at $25, but this ends today. I'll pass on that ownership. I don't think you're looking at DFS correctly anymore. That's a very 2017 theory. Individual ownership is the most meaningless statistic that anybody could look at. There's so much more involved than that now. Back in the day, yeah. Now, all you're doing is making your lineups worse. There are other ways to fix ownership than the guys that have the highest success rate of anybody on the slate. Remember, you got to get 8 things right in your lineup. You need 8 successes to win a GPP. It's never going to help you to disregard the highest likelihood of success, because you still have 7 more to go after that. Now, that's not to say that you can't end up lower an ownership. You can see him be 47% owned, and you can play 10% of him if you want. And you can do that and get all of those lineups be positive sim ROI lineups if you want them to be. But I would never just look at somebody's ownership and be like, that's too high. He's not the best play on the slate. That's just wrong. He's clearly the best play on the slate, at least as of 9:45 a.m. And I have him projected even heavier than we do. And we already have him at 47% ownership. Mike, no, not really. That was in 2018. It's not now. The relationship between ownership is not just an individual player's ownership any longer. You need to think about everything that's going on in your lineup as a whole. But yeah, like whether you can play 100% of D-Lo today or 0% of D-Lo today. And neither one of those have to be the wrong answer. Because you can build out positive sim ROI lineups with him and without him, and basically as many as you would like. That's not a problem. You can build that portfolio and still be okay. And that's why we shouldn't be paying attention at all to an individual ownership number, other than to let you know how good of a play someone actually is. The public consolidates on the best stuff. They just do. You don't want to play him? There's nothing wrong with not wanting to play him. But to not play him for that kind of reason is you're missing the mark for it. It doesn't need to be that. It doesn't need to be that. I play on FanDuel. He's 6,100. Well, on FanDuel, he's not the best play on the slate. So that probably changes things up a little bit. But yeah, look, you're trying to get all of the successes you can in an individual lineup. What you really want to do is maximize your successes as much as possible in relationship to those ownership numbers. Now let's hit this final game on the DraftKings side. It's going to be the Dallas Mavericks, 5.5-point dogs in Houston, 221 total. Mavs are obviously still without Luka Doncic. They had an ugly one last time out in terms of guys that were available. Q-tag on Derek Lively today. We're still without Najee Marshall, but we should have Kyrie again for this one. Kyrie is a little over 15% owned. PJ Washington is around 10. And then Daniel Gafford is around 20. I don't know what to do at center with these guys. If Lively is in, I probably don't want a 22% owned Daniel Gafford. That's for sure. I think we'll be able to find other options. I would say that he would be over-owned. We need that news to really understand it. But I'm happy to get to Kyrie. I think you could take a shot at Clay. I think Dinwiddie is useless at 6,800. Not a guy that I'm looking at. And I do think PJ Washington is a bit over-owned at 7,100. I don't really like getting to Dallas here. This is a very difficult defensive matchup, even without Amin Thompson today. If I'm going anywhere, I'm willing to click on Kyrie's name, given the MPE, given the fact there's no Luka. And then if Gafford is the guy today, it's because you would get no Lively. If Lively is back, I think it's pretty difficult to want to get to Gafford if he's still projecting for this sort of ownership. Because then it gets complicated. Doesn't even have to be Gafford at that point. Maxi Kleba can slide to the 5 if they needed him to. But if Lively is out, then we're going to be looking at a really good point per dollar play in Daniel Gafford. Now on the Houston side, as I mentioned, Amin Thompson is suspended. He's not playing today. Tari Eason, stop me if you've heard this before. He is questionable for this one. We're getting a little north of 10% ownership on Van Vliet, on Dylan Brooks. Şengün is at 15. Jalen Green is north of 20. And then Jabari Smith, as per usual, 2% owned. I will continue to say this every day. I think Jabari Smith is a hair under-owned. Just looks a little bit more optimal than what he shows, and you never know when he's fallen into bigger minutes. And then I think that Şengün, Van Vliet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks should all be in that 10 to 15 range. I'm a little surprised to see Jalen Green break away from the pack and get to 23% ownership without an MPE, just regular old 6,600 shooting guard. That feels a tad high. But I do think that those 4 guys should all probably be in that 15% range. Now, if Tari Eason happens to be out today, like he's been, we're probably gonna want to take a real close look at Cam Whitmore and or Reed Shepherd. Probably Cam Whitmore, because we saw him get, 27 minutes a night for back-to-back games. If there's no Amin Thompson and there's no Tari Eason, I think we're going to pay very close attention to Cam Whitmore, and he's going to be one of the more interesting value plays that you can get to. And then Reed Shepherd at the flat 3K, it could be a couple extra minutes for him. That one I don't feel as great about. It would be Cam Whitmore that we're looking for. I've got a hard time wanting to go to Tari Eason. I have no trust in his minutes. This dude's been questionable over and over and over again. It's a leg injury. If he's back, they're clearly not stretching him. But get your Van Vliets. Get your Jalen Greens. Get your Dylan Brookses. Get your Alperen Şengüns. Get your Jabari Smiths in situations where you want to pivot from something slightly higher owned. Alrighty, folks. Final 2 games. This is FanDuel only. These are on the FanDuel main, but they're not a part of the DraftKings main. Atlanta Hawks, 5-point dogs in Denver, 246 total. Now, for Atlanta, they're a little walking wounded. Bogdan Bogdanovic is doubtful. Dyson Daniels is probable. Larry Nance broke his hand, so he is out right now. And then Trae Young is probable for this one. So we're getting 25% ownership to Dyson Daniels, 25% ownership to Jalen Johnson, and 10 to Trae Young. I want to flip all of this. Why is Trae Young 10% owned, but Jalen Johnson is 25? Riddle me that, because I don't see it. I think Trae Young is massively under-owned on FanDuel today. I think Jalen Johnson looks good. I do think he should be 20 to 25% owned. Well, bring Trae along for the ride, too. The one that makes the least amount of sense to me is Dyson Daniels. I don't see the reason he would be 25% owned. That seems way too high. This guy has no offensive skill set whatsoever. You are begging and begging for him to get steals in this spot, because that's your path to a really big Dyson Daniels game. You need stocks. That's the only way that it's going to happen. Stocks. And Denver on the season, 12th in turnover rate. I don't know. I would be avoiding Dyson Daniels a bit on FanDuel. I would be getting to quite a bit more of Trae Young. And then I think Jalen Johnson is like properly owned. After that, if Hunter or Capella or Risashe end up in a lineup, I think that's okay. Now on the Denver side, we've got 10% ownership coming into Jamal Murray, 20 coming into a $12,800 Nikola Jokic. What is Zach Rockery? Yes, that's like a Quora question. 10% ownership to MPJ, 10% ownership to Christian Brown, 23% ownership to a $7,300 Russell Westbrook. So I could sum this one up pretty quick. You're only paying attention to those 5 starters. I think Murray is a hair underowned. I think Jokic is about right. I think MPJ is a hair underowned. I think Christian Brown is about right. And I honestly think that Russell Westbrook is a bit overowned here. I had him 11% optimal, 22% boom. 23% ownership feels a little high. 15 feels like it would be in the more dialed in area. But a little overowned. I don't think he should be the most owned guy for the Nuggets today on FanDuel. He's good as a DFS play. Like, I don't have any problem rostering him. But that number feels a hair high. Alrighty. Steven, not really. Okongwu is 5,200 power forward center. He's a completely reasonable 5%er. You failed French. You're typing the words out. It looks like every other language. I can understand not being able to say it, but typing it's no different. Final game, Philadelphia 76ers, 10 o'clock start, 6.5-point dogs in Sacramento, 223 total. No, Joel Embiid for this one. Embiid out. Andre Drummond, questionable. Eric Gordon, questionable. Kyle Lowry, questionable. Still no KJ Martin. 10% ownership to Maxey. Looks wildly underowned. Good luck balancing him and Trae Young. Love them both today. Caleb Martin is 40% owned. Feels a tad high, but good value. Paul George is 50% owned. Feels a tad high, but good value. If Paul George is 50% owned today and Tyrese Maxey is 10% owned, I think all of you know what to do. All of you know what to do there. Because that is a really wild split. That's crazy. Get more Maxey, get less George. Not that George doesn't look good, but that distribution is crazy. Caleb Martin's 2 owned, but at least it's the late game. I don't have any problem getting to that much ownership to Philly because late swaps will be better. For Sacramento, they are likely to be without Keegan Murray. He is doubtful. Jay Crowder is questionable. Slowly but surely getting Devin Carter back, which will be fun. 35% ownership to Malik Monk. I don't agree with it. DeMar DeRozan's at 18. You can see my optimal rates if you really want to know how I feel about these guys. 12, 12, 13, 12. Fox, Monk, Sabonis, DeRozan. As far as I'm concerned, those four guys are the same guys. If Monk's getting a bunch of ownership, get more Sabonis, get more Fox. Sabonis should destroy the Sixers front court today. Well, Sabonis should try doing a lot of things, but for right now, they should try just simply winning a basketball game and not being trash. 14 and 19. These guys are wildly overrated, and I've been singing it from the rooftops for years. So, no, I'll assume that Andre Drummond can handle that job. Because it's Domantas Sabonis. An overrated star. Alrighty, folks. NFL strategy show coming up next at 10 a.m. Hit the like button on your way out the door. It's been swell, guys. It's a great start to 2025. I hope you guys have a great January 1st. I'll see you guys again on the deeper dive tonight at 5 o'clock.